After the defeat of the king of Persia in Assos in 333 BC, and to protect himself from the danger of the powerful Persian fleet in the Mediterranean, Alexander the Great initiated the invasion of all the marine ports in Syria and Palestine, then invaded Egypt, which fell without a fight when Mazazes, the Persian wali, surrendered Memphis fortress with its garrison and safe. Alexander was actually welcomed by the Egyptians with joy, as they regarded him the liberator from the cruel Persian rule. The Egyptian priests in Memphis acknowledged the Macedonian invader as a king over Egypt. Special rituals were performed in the temple of God Ptah, where Alexander presented offerings to him and other gods, as he knew that nothing has upset the Egyptians like the killing of Ochos to the Apis bull, and the disrespect which Cambyses showed towards him. In fact, the respect which Alexander has shown towards the Egyptian gods and the offerings he presented were not fake ways to reach out to them, but that tendency was a real distinctive characteristic of that great leader. In the first middle of 331 BC, and after Alexander established the city of Alexandria, he headed towards Siwa. That visit wasn't only the most famous visit in the ancient history, but beyond doubt it was a main event that immortalized the name of Siwa Oasis in both the ancient and modern times. Since the 8th century BC, and even before that, Egypt was well known for the Greeks, as many of the writers wrote in the 6th and 5th and 4th centuries about Egypt, and many of their celebrities who founded the principles of the Greek civilization bragged about teaching their students in Greece what was taught to them by the Egyptian priests. Since the 8th century BC, a Greek trade center was established in Naucratis in western Delta, and hence many Greek traders established good routes for trade with Egypt. On the other hand, many Greek philosophers came to Egypt to study in the schools attached to the temples. Amongst them was Solon the Athenian, and Lindos, and Kippelos, and Thales, and Miletus, and the famous Pythagoras and Platon, who stayed in Egypt for a long time, and later worked on spreading the famosity of the Egyptian wisdom. By these communications, it became settled in the minds of the Greeks that Egypt is a cradle of philosophy and sophism, and music, and sculpture, and arts in general. In the same time, Ammon's temples spread in the Greek cities, and in Athens, they celebrated the opening of a temple consecrated to Ammon in 333 BC, which was less than 2 years of the visit of Alexander to the temple oracle of Siwa. The journey of Alexander along the western coast of Alexandria wasn't undecided before. At Protonium, or Mersa Matruh, ambassadors from Cornicia met him and gave him many presents, including 300 horses and few carriages and a golden crown, and most of all, their obedience and friendship. Alexander's journey from Protonium to Ammon's oasis started in the winter season, between the end of January and the middle of February in 331 BC. A big team of his friends and soldiers accompanied him, including Callisinus, the royal historian. He's the one who left us that incredible description of this journey and quoted by later writers. He said, "They've used the old caravan route that's called today Masrab al-Istabl, and known for the Bedouins by the name Darb al-Mahashas or Sikket al-Sultan. It's 300 kilometers long and takes from 7 to 8 days to be covered using camels." Plutarch claims that Alexander received a great help from God during that journey and was more credible than the prophecy he got itself. For after a few days of walking in the desert, they were about to run out of water, but suddenly rain fell down and saved them. Later on, a violent wind came, and they lost their way, but two crows showed up and flew ahead of the caravan which followed them. The more absurd story is that they flew according to the speed of the caravan. In conclusion, the supreme power of gods guarded and protected Alexander, and miracles happened any time to save his life. After a long and dangerous trip in the desert, the caravan arrived to the oasis, and its members were surprised with the scene of the massive shade offered by the palms and olive trees, and by the plentifulness of water gushing through the springs. It seems that Alexander didn't send a declaration of his arrival to Siwa, and we can only imagine the surprise that overwhelmed the people of the oasis and the priests who hurried to welcome Alexander at the foot of the rock of Ahurmi. Alexander was so anxious to visit the oracle as soon as he could, so he went straight to the temple. When he arrived there, the high priest of Ammon's temple saluted him. Most probably that greeting was in Greek language. He called him son of Zeus Ammon, master of all countries, the one who's not defeated until he's united with God. That was a greeting that was given to any Egyptian pharaoh, for each king, including Alexander, after invading Egypt, had titles. One of his titles was son of Ra, the sun god, as well as other titles that show his divine origin and describe the superpowers that he enjoys. Alexander stood with a group of his followers in the court of the temple to watch the passing of the procession of the god. The statue of Ammon was adorned with emerald and placed in a boat and carried above the shoulders of the priests. Both young and old women musicians wore white clothes. They played music and sang and danced while the procession kept going round and round in the temple in front of Alexander and his followers, until the high priest declared that the heart of the god is satisfied. After that, the Macedonian followers were permitted to address the oracle with a question they wanted. One of them asked if their king could be granted with a divine honor. The answer was, this would please the heart of God Ammon. Alexander didn't want to ask his questions in the presence of others, so he asked to have privacy with the god. Thus, the priests led him to the sanctuary, or the Holy of the Holies of the temple, where the sacred bark was placed. Alexander spent a time alone in the presence of the god Ammon in the sanctuary of the oracle temple. We could imagine his followers waiting outside, almost breathless in the thick air that covered the whole site, where magic was happening and deciding the future of the ancient world and its great leader. After some time, Alexander returned to his companions, who anxiously asked him about what happened and what the oracle prophesied for him. His reply was, "I have heard from it what I wanted." He kept for himself the secret of his meeting with the oracle, and when he wrote later to his mother Olympias, he told her that he had received special answers from the oracle, which he'll be telling her when he returned to Macedonia. After that, Alexander rushed in his Asiatic invasions and was destined not to see his mother again, for he died 8 years later in Babylon and has not returned even once during that time back home to Macedonia. In spite of the recording of these events in most of the books written about Alexander's life, yet very little news were mentioned about the questions and answers he received from the oracle. Plutarch, for example, said that when Alexander inquired if the assassins of his father had escaped from his grave, the priest declared that he wouldn't describe him like that, for his father isn't immortal. Then he asked if the assassins of Philip were punished, and if he was given the support to be the conqueror of the world. So Jupiter Ammon replied that he was granted the supreme privilege, and that Philip's death was revenged enough. Alexander presented offerings to Ammon and gave the priests many gifts. It seemed that his stay in Oasis lasted just few days. On his way back, he followed another desert road passing by Qarret Soghayr, which is a small oasis by the edge of Al-Qattara Depression, 130 kilometers away from Siwa Oasis. A rocky hill there is named after him and is called the Camp of Alexander or Qarret el-Iskandar. From there, he headed straight to Memphis. That journey could be done in almost 2 weeks. Ever since his infancy, Alexander was a strong believer in supernatural powers and prophecies, for his mother Olympias inspired to him that he is not a human, but he is from a divine origin, like Horus, and that among his ancestors are the 2 gods Perseus and Hercules, and the hero Achilles. As for his father Philip, he provided him with the best tutors, and who could be more knowledgeable than Aristotle, the most famous philosopher, not to mention that he was one of the Greek philosophers who completed their education in Egypt. The oracle of Ammon's famosity overwhelmed the ancient world, and its prophecies were highly appreciated and recorded in many writings. Even King Philip believed in its power and was advised by the oracle of Delphi to present an offering to god Jupiter Ammon and submit his obedience specifically to this god. Alexander the Great has inherited the boldness and the bravery from his father, and from his mother he got a passion of superstition and extreme rituals. A year before coming to Egypt, he visited Gordium Temple in Minor Asia, where the oracle dared him to unlock a knot in King Gorgias' carriage to be the master of Asia. He cut the knot, and thunder struck, so he took it as a sign for the god's consent. From that time, he was possessed by dreams of mastering the world, and in the first message he sent to Dara, he called himself the King of Asia. Believing in the great bond that ties him with his ancestors Perseus and Hercules, who had previously consulted with the god, Alexander wanted to follow their steps by making this trip to Siwa and consult the oracle. The best proof of that is his coronation in Ptah Temple in Memphis, and being offered the title of the son of the god there when he invaded Egypt. So he could have settled with that if he wanted, especially that the military situation required staying in his headquarters in Egypt, especially that Dara was rearranging his forces, and Alexander was keen on confronting him as soon as possible. In spite of that, he made a journey to Siwa to consult the oracle of Amon's temple there. There were 7 prophecies in the ancient world, but the oracle of Amon in Siwa maintained a great famosity that spread all over the Mediterranean countries, starting from the 26th dynasty, and its answers were received with great trust and respect. The temples of Amon were built all around the Greek cities. Even in Athens, a temple consecrated for Amon was inaugurated in 333 BC, less than 2 years before Alexander's visit to the Oracle Temple. Alexander knew all these facts and the tales that talks about his direct relation with Amon and his divine birth. No one knows what happened in the sanctuary of Amon, or what were Alexander's questions and their answers. But it's a fact that, after that day, Alexander became a devoted believer in God Amon and was proud to consider himself his son. Throughout the 8 years left in his life, and as he continued his conquest in Asia, he kept sending messengers with gifts to Siwa priests. When his best friend, Hephaestion, died, Alexander sent to Siwa to ask the oracle if he can be lifted to the level of gods, but the answer came declaring him to be a hero. As a sign of his great loyalty to Amon in Siwa, Alexander ordered before his death one of his close friends, Aridaeus, to bury him close to his father Amon. A great funerary procession walked from Babylon to Egypt. Ptolemy met it on its way in Palestine and accompanied it till Memphis, where Ptolemy insisted on burying Alexander in Alexandria and sent a memorial to the priests of Amon instead. Alexander's golden sarcophagus was visited in Alexandria by Roman kings and travelers until Leo Africanus in the 15th century, but the tomb's location was buried and lost after that and wasn't found till today. The love and appreciation Alexander held for his father Amon and his ways was so great that he never considered Macedonia or Babylon or Alexandria as eternal resting places for his body, or even to be buried in Aegea beside his real father. But he preferred to be buried in Siwa, that small oasis in the western desert of Egypt.